The pulse hit every communications relay in the Galactic Council simultaneously. Admiral Krath of the Vaxian fleet felt his blood crystallize when the translation matrix finally decoded the signal. It came from a star system the Council had deliberately kept off every official map for 300 cycles. The message was simple, automated, and catastrophic. Earth. That was the planet's real name, not Terra. 7 as the quarantine protocols listed it, not the nameless rock in Sector 949. Earth. The word itself carried no weight in Council languages, but the numeric identifier attached to it did. Every species in the known galaxy maintained ancient databases of forbidden designations, warnings passed down from the first expansion era. Earth's numeric signature matched one entry perfectly: Deathworld Class Omega. Krath's secondary heart seized. Deathworld classifications ran from Alpha to Epsilon, marking planets where life evolved under extreme conditions that produced unusually resilient organisms. Epsilon worlds bred species that could survive vacuum exposure for short periods. Delta worlds created beings that could withstand radiation that would liquefy most organic matter. But Omega classification existed in theory only. The mathematical models suggested such a world would be impossible. Gravity too strong, atmospheric pressure too variable, temperature swings too extreme, predator saturation too dense, microbial evolution too aggressive. Nothing could evolve sapience in that hell. The models were wrong. The automated beacon was old, probably launched centuries ago by the humans themselves before they understood what they were announcing. It broadcasted continuously, a simple identifier ping that any species developing faster than light travel would eventually detect. Humanity had been shouting their location and name to the galaxy the whole time. The Council had found them 80 cycles ago during a mineral survey. First contact protocols demanded observation before interaction. The observation team lasted 4 days before requesting immediate extraction. Their report used words like relentless, inventive, and dangerously curious. One xenobiologist noted that humans possessed persistence hunting instincts, that they apply to everything from prey to mathematical problems to social relationships. They were predators who never stopped chasing. The Council voted to seal the system. No contact, no trade, no acknowledgement of their existence. Humanity would be allowed to develop in isolation until they either destroyed themselves or evolved past their dangerous phase. That was 80 cycles ago. The beacon humanity launched 200 cycles ago finally reached the outer reaches, where automated systems couldn't be ordered to ignore it. Now 700 species knew exactly where humanity lived and what they were. Kraft pulled up the surveillance data the monitoring stations had gathered. His claws trembled as he scrolled through the files. Humans had developed fusion power in less than a century after splitting the atom. They had bases on 3 planets and 17 moons in their system. Their population exceeded 8 billion on their homeworld alone. They had primitive, but functional faster-than-light theory. Conservative estimates gave them 15 cycles before they'd have working prototypes. 15 cycles before Deathworld Omega's apex predators learned to hunt between stars. The emergency session convened within hours. Representatives from every major species crowded the council chambers. The Zephrani matriarch spoke first, her translator barely managing to convey her panic. Humans lived on a world where the gravity crushed Zephrani bones, where the oxygen levels would ignite Zephrani tissues, where seasonal temperature variations would freeze and boil Zephrani blood within local cycles. Yet humans thrived. They built cities. They created art. They developed weapons that could crack continents. Commander Vin of the Cortesh Empire presented combat analysis. Humans had spent their entire recorded history at war with themselves. They documented it, studied it, taught it to their young. Every human military academy taught thousands of cycles of tactical evolution. They had weapons they'd invented just to kill each other more efficiently. Kinetic bombardment, biological warfare, atomic fire, chemical death. And those were just the weapons they'd already used. Intelligence reports suggested they were developing worse. The Pell Collective's representative raised a disturbing point. Humans formed emotional bonds with other species. Their planet had been a nightmare of competing predators, and somehow humans had domesticated dozens of them. They kept carnivores in their homes as companions. They bred loyalty into creatures that should have seen them as prey. If humans could make allies of their own planet's monsters, what would they do with spacefaring species? Krath felt the chamber's fear intensify, but beneath that fear ran something else. Calculation. The Vaxian Empire had enemies. The Cortesh had rivals. The Pell Collective faced rebellion in 3 sectors. Everyone in this room had someone they wanted eliminated. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Could humanity be aimed? Could they be controlled? Could they be weaponized? The vote passed with suspicious speed. Humanity would be contacted. A diplomatic envoy would be sent. First contact would proceed under standard protocols. Krath reviewed the mission parameters and felt his third stomach clench. They were going to shake hands with Deathworld Omega's children and pretend everything was fine. They were going to smile at the apex predators and welcome them to the galaxy. They were going to open the cage and hope the monsters inside didn't realize they'd been locked up. Captain Lisa Grant reviewed the anomalous readings for the 3rd time. Something massive had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Multiple somethings. Her console lit up with trajectories. 15 ships, each massing more than anything humanity had ever built. They were broadcasting on basic mathematical frequencies, the universal greeting every search for extraterrestrial intelligence project had hoped to receive. First contact protocols activated automatically. Lisa's hand shook as she reached for the response transmitter. Humanity was about to learn they weren't alone. The galaxy was about to learn why that was a problem. The Galactic Council delegation approached Earth with every weapon system powered but concealed. They came bearing gifts and trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. They came prepared to negotiate, to establish boundaries, to integrate humanity carefully into galactic society. They had contingency plans for aggression, for demands, for territorial disputes. They had backup fleets positioned in 3 adjacent systems. They had assassination protocols if the situation deteriorated. What they weren't prepared for was humanity's enthusiasm. The humans were excited. They wanted to learn everything. They wanted to meet everyone. They wanted to explore, to trade, to collaborate, to join. The delegation watched humanity's reaction and realized their catastrophic mistake. They hadn't locked up monsters. They'd locked up something far more terrifying. They'd locked up explorers who viewed the galaxy as one magnificent mystery waiting to be solved. And now those explorers knew there were 700 species worth of mysteries out there. The panic wasn't spreading anymore. It had arrived, and it was wearing a spacesuit with an Earth flag on the shoulder, extending its hand in greeting, smiling with teeth that marked it unmistakably as a predator, saying the 3 words that would haunt the galaxy for generations. Take us with you. Admiral Krath stood in the observation deck of the Council flagship, watching the human delegation board their shuttle. 3 humans. That's all Earth had sent for this first official meeting. 2 women and 1 man, chosen by some process the Council xenologists were still trying to decipher. The man, introduced as Captain Daniel Cooper, carried himself with military precision. 1 woman, Dr. Laura Mitchell, displayed the intense curiosity the initial reports had warned about. She'd already asked 47 questions during the preliminary greetings. The 3rd human, Ambassador Helen Ross, seemed to be their diplomatic specialist. She smiled constantly. Krath found that smile deeply unsettling. The Council had prepared an entire station for these negotiations. Neutral territory in the Kepler system, equidistant from Earth and the nearest Council worlds. Security teams from 9 different species monitored every corridor. Medical staff stood ready to handle any biological incompatibilities. Translators worked overtime, because human languages apparently numbered in the thousands. and they'd decided to use something called English as their diplomatic standard. The humans had arrived in a ship they'd built themselves, primitive by council standards, but it worked. It had functioning faster-than-light capability, despite humanity having never received the fundamental equations. They'd figured it out themselves in just under 12 cycles. The mathematics were crude, inefficient, and absolutely shouldn't have worked according to standard physics. But the ship had arrived, which meant human mathematics didn't care about standard physics. The initial cultural exchange proceeded carefully. The humans wanted to know everything about everyone. They asked about biology, history, culture, religion, economics, art, and warfare, especially warfare. That last topic made several delegates nervous. Captain Cooper explained that understanding military history helped prevent future conflicts. He said it with such earnestness that Krath almost believed him. Almost. But Krath had reviewed the surveillance data. He knew humans studied war the way Vaxians studied molecular chemistry. With dedication, precision, and the absolute certainty that mastery of the subject provided survival advantages. Dr. Mitchell proved to be exactly as problematic as predicted. She wanted samples of everything. Biological material, yes, but also technology, art, food, literature, music. She explained that Earth had entire institutions dedicated to studying other cultures. Anthropology, she called it. The word didn't translate well, but the concept was clear enough. Humans had developed an entire scientific discipline around understanding different ways of thinking. They'd practiced on themselves first, studying their own cultural variations, and now they wanted to apply those skills to 700 alien species. The Pell Collective representative nearly fainted when Dr. Mitchell asked about the rebellion problems. How did she even know about those? Ambassador Ross conducted the actual negotiations with frightening competence. She understood the political dynamics within the council faster than some species who'd been members for centuries. She identified power blocks, trade relationships, and historical tensions with minimal information. When the Cortesh delegation tried to use their military superiority as leverage, Ross smiled and mentioned that Earth would be very interested in defensive partnerships with their neighbors. When the Zephrani attempted to restrict human expansion rights, Ross casually observed that Earth had materials the Zephrani economy needed. She never threatened, never demanded, never pushed. She just made it abundantly clear that humanity had done their homework and knew exactly where everyone's pressure points were. The humans had one primary request: access to the Galactic Library. Every species contributed their accumulated knowledge to the library, a repository of 800,000 cycles of collected information. Science, history, culture, technology, philosophy, everything. The Council hesitated. Giving humanity access to that much knowledge felt like handing a child a fusion reactor. But refusing would violate the Council's founding principles. Every member species had library access. Denying it to humanity would require justification, and the Council couldn't explain that they were terrified of what humanity might do with that information, without admitting they'd been illegally surveilling Earth for 80 cycles. The vote passed. Humanity gained provisional Council membership. They would have trade rights, diplomatic status, and library access. In return, they would accept standard expansion protocols, submit to Council arbitration for disputes, and allow monitoring stations in their system. Ambassador Ross agreed to everything immediately. Too immediately. Krath watched her sign the agreements and felt his danger instinct screaming. This human diplomat wasn't concerned about the restrictions because she knew her species would outgrow them. How long until humanity had colonies the Council couldn't monitor? How long until human trade networks rivaled the major empires? How long until human ships outnumbered everyone else's? The celebration that evening was mandatory diplomatic theater. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to welcome humanity officially. The humans adapted to the situation with unnerving ease. Captain Cooper discussed military history with Cordish commanders, finding common ground in tactical analysis. Dr. Mitchell collected contact information from scientific delegates, already planning research collaborations. Ambassador Ross worked the room like she'd been doing this for centuries, building relationships, identifying allies, planting seeds for future negotiations. Krath observed from a distance, nursing a drink his metabolism could barely process. A young Pell administrator approached him, chittering with excitement about the possibilities humanity represented. Fresh perspectives, innovative thinking, cultural exchange. Krath didn't have the heart to crush that enthusiasm with reality. The human ship departed 3 days later. They'd accomplished everything they came for and left behind carefully cultivated relationships with 24 species. The council delegation filed their reports with mixed feelings. Official statements praised the successful first contact. Private communications expressed everything from cautious optimism to existential dread. Krath filed his own report and included a personal observation. Humanity didn't just adapt to new situations. They excelled in them. They found advantages in circumstances that would paralyze other species. Give them a problem and they'd solve it. Give them a goal and they'd achieve it. Give them an enemy and they'd defeat it. The galaxy had just given humanity 700 species worth of problems, goals, and potential enemies. Back on Earth, the 3 human delegates delivered their own reports. Captain Cooper provided military assessments. The Council species were individually formidable, but their combat doctrines were rigid, evolved from different environmental pressures. Human tactical flexibility would be a significant advantage if conflicts arose. Dr. Mitchell presented scientific analysis. The Galactic Library contained more knowledge than humanity could process in centuries, but she'd identified key technologies Earth could adapt immediately. Medical advances, material science, energy production. Ambassador Ross outlined her political strategy. The council was fragmented, full of competing interests and historical grudges. Humanity could position itself as neutral arbitrators, essential partners, indispensable allies. Within a generation, Earth wouldn't just be a council member. It would be a council power. The president reviewed all 3 reports and made a decision. Humanity would proceed, carefully but confidently. They would respect council laws and diplomatic protocols. They would be good neighbors and reliable partners. But they would also expand, explore, and establish themselves as a species that couldn't be ignored or contained. Earth had spent its entire history competing for resources on a world that tried to kill everything living on it. They'd fought each other because they'd had no one else to fight. Now they had an entire galaxy to explore, 700 species to meet, and unlimited opportunities to prove that Deathworld Omega hadn't just produced survivors. It had produced winners. The message went out to every nation, every agency, every institution. Humanity was going to the stars, and the stars were going to have to make room. 15 cycles. That's how long the Council had estimated before humanity developed practical faster-than-light travel. They were wrong. It took 4. Human engineers accessed the Galactic Library and didn't just study the provided equations. They improved them. Standard Council drives operated at roughly 5 times light speed. Human prototype drives hit 8, then 12, then 15. The efficiency improvements alone would have taken most species decades to achieve. Humanity did it in 4 cycles, and they weren't being secretive about it. They published their findings in Council scientific journals. They shared their innovations with anyone interested. They acted like galactic citizens should, contributing to the collective knowledge base. The Council didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. The humans spread fast. Colony ships launched toward nearby systems the Council had mapped but never bothered settling. Worlds with slightly too much gravity. Planets with aggressive ecosystems. Moons with thin atmospheres. Places other species considered marginal at best. Humans looked at these worlds and saw opportunities. Within 6 cycles, humanity had established 17 colonies. Within 10, that number reached 50. The colonies weren't just mining operations or research outposts. They were full settlements. Families, cities, cultures developing their own local variations. Humanity had learned from their own history. They didn't conquer or claim or demand. They simply occupied empty spaces and made them productive. Trade networks formed naturally. Human colonies produced materials efficiently from worlds other species couldn't work. They sold to nearby council systems at competitive prices. Human manufacturing combined council technology with their own innovations, creating hybrid products that outperformed traditional designs. Human entertainments exploded across the galaxy. Their music, their stories, their art resonated with species that shouldn't have found it relatable. A Zafrani musician collaborated with a human composer and created something entirely new. A Cortesh director adapted a human story about persistence hunting and made it into the highest-grossing entertainment product in that sector. Humans had a gift for finding common ground across biological boundaries. The backlash was inevitable. Conservative factions within the council started demanding restrictions. Humanity was expanding too fast, taking resources, disrupting established trade, spreading their culture like a plague. The Territorial Preservation Coalition formed specifically to contain human growth. 12 species signed the accord, pledging to block human expansion into their sectors. Ambassador Ross, now promoted to Earth's chief diplomat, appeared before the council to address the concerns. She didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't protest. She simply asked questions. Which resources were humans taking that those species needed? Which trade agreements were humans disrupting? Which cultural practices were humans destroying? The coalition representatives had answers, but the answers were vague, emotional, based on fear rather than evidence. Humans hadn't taken anything that wasn't freely available. Hadn't disrupted trade, just provided alternatives. Hadn't destroyed cultures, just offered different perspectives. The vote to restrict humanity failed. Barely. The margin was close enough that everyone understood the political landscape had shifted. The galaxy was dividing into factions. Species that saw humanity as an opportunity, and species that saw them as a threat. Neither side was entirely wrong. Krath, now promoted to strategic command, watched the political maneuvering with grim satisfaction. He'd predicted this, warned about this. Nobody had listened because the alternative to accepting humanity was fighting humanity, and nobody wanted to be the first to test whether Deathworld Omega had produced better warriors than it had diplomats and scientists. Then the Verge crisis happened. The Outer Verge, a cluster of systems on the galactic rim, reported spatial anomalies. Something was tearing holes in normal space. Ships disappeared. Stations went dark. Survey teams found evidence of technology that didn't match anything in the library. Either someone had developed weapons beyond council understanding, or something from outside the galaxy had found its way in. Either option was catastrophic. The council mobilized a joint task force. 15 species contributed ships. Krath commanded the vaccine contingent. The force assembled at Rally Point Meridian and prepared for reconnaissance operations. Then the human ships arrived. Earth had sent 4 vessels, not their largest ships but their newest. Captain Daniel Cooper commanded the lead ship, now an actual warship rather than the exploration vessel he'd piloted to first contact. He explained that Earth had monitored the situation and wanted to contribute to galactic security. The Council couldn't refuse without looking weak. But accepting meant bringing Deathworld Omega's children into the first potentially serious conflict since humanity joined the galactic community. Krath met with Cooper privately. He needed to know if humanity understood what they were getting into. Cooper's response was simple. His species had spent 5,000 cycles fighting on a world that considered them prey. They'd learned to be very good at fighting. If something out there threatened the galaxy, humanity would help stop it. Not because of politics or obligation. Because that's what you did when your neighbors were in danger. Krath looked into Cooper's eyes and saw the same predator intensity he'd feared during first contact. But now that intensity was aimed outward, protecting instead of threatening. Maybe. Possibly. He hoped. The Joint Task Force entered the Verge systems in standard formation. Sensors detected the anomalies immediately. Tears in space-time, maybe artificial wormholes, definitely not natural phenomena. Something was creating doorways, and things were coming through. The first engagement happened before anyone was ready. Entities emerged from an anomaly, if entities was even the right word. They didn't match any known biology. They absorbed energy weapons. They moved through solid matter. They replicated exponentially. The task force weapons did nothing. Kinetic rounds passed through. Energy beams fed them. Nuclear detonations made them stronger. The Council forces retreated in chaos, losing 6 ships in the first encounter. The human ships didn't retreat. They adapted. Cooper watched the entities consume energy and immediately switched tactics. His ships went dark, cutting all power except life support. They drifted like debris while his crew analyzed the entity's behavior. 40 minutes of observation. Then Cooper reactivated his ships and opened fire with something new. Electromagnetic pulse weapons. Humanity had developed them for planetary conflicts, devices designed to disable electronics without causing structural damage. The pulses didn't hurt the entities, but they disrupted whatever process allowed them to maintain cohesion. The entities scattered, their replication pattern breaking down. They weren't destroyed, but they retreated back through the anomalies. The human ships pursued, mapping the tier locations, gathering data. Cooper transmitted his findings to the entire task force. The entities were vulnerable to disruption, not destruction. Fight them with chaos, not order. Use unpredictable tactics. Deny them patterns to adapt to. The Council forces regrouped and implemented Cooper's strategy. The second engagement went better. The third, even better. By the 5th engagement, the Joint Force had developed an entire doctrine around fighting these things. Humanity's contribution wasn't superior weapons or numbers. It was adaptability. They looked at an impossible problem and immediately started experimenting with solutions. The Verge crisis lasted 18 local cycles. The task force closed 47 anomalies and drove the entities back to whatever dimension they'd come from. Casualties were significant. The Council lost 32 ships. Humanity lost 1, not because human ships were better protected, but because human tactics prioritized survival over glory. They fought smart. When overwhelmed, they retreated and regrouped. When outmatched, they adapted and changed approach. They'd spent their entire history learning these lessons on a world where mistakes meant extinction. Now those lessons kept them alive against an enemy that could phase through armor and replicate faster than missiles could fly. The Joint Force returned to Council space as heroes. Ceremonies were held. Medals were distributed. Treaties were strengthened, and everyone pretended not to notice that humanity had just proven themselves in combat against an enemy that had shredded Council forces. The political implications were obvious. Humanity wasn't just good at science and trade and diplomacy. They were good at war. Really, really good. The aftermath of the Verge crisis changed everything. Species that had been neutral toward humanity suddenly wanted defense pacts. Regions that had restricted human expansion now invited human colonies. The Territorial Preservation Coalition quietly dissolved. Nobody wanted to antagonize the species that had figured out how to fight extra-dimensional invaders using improvised tactics and stolen technology. Krath filed his final report on the crisis and included a personal note that would never appear in official records. The galaxy had been terrified of humanity for the wrong reasons. Yes, they came from a death world. Yes, they were persistent predators. Yes, they were frighteningly adaptable. But the real danger wasn't that humanity would conquer the galaxy. It was that they'd become indispensable to it. In 20 cycles, humanity had made themselves essential. Trading partners. scientific collaborators, military allies, cultural influencers. The galaxy couldn't function without them anymore. That was the true genius of Deathworld Omega's children. They didn't beat you. They made you need them. Ambassador Helen Ross stood before the full Council Assembly and made Earth's proposal. Humanity wanted to establish a mutual defense network. Any species could join. All members would contribute resources proportional to their capabilities. All members would receive protection. No species would be obligated to fight outside their comfort zone. Humans would handle high-risk operations. Others could provide logistics, intelligence, support. The proposal was carefully designed to address every species' concerns while cementing humanity's role as the galaxy's security specialists. The vote wasn't even close. 412 species signed immediately. Another 200 joined within the cycle. Only 37 declined, mostly species so isolated or advanced they didn't need external defense. The Galactic Defense Initiative launched with humanity at its core. Not as conquerors, not as overlords. As the species everyone called when things went wrong. Earth's population passed 11 billion. The colonies added another 4 billion. Human ships outnumbered every other species except the ancient Valen, who'd had a 1,000,000-cycle head start. Human scientists published research in every major journal. Human artists collaborated across species boundaries. Human merchants traded in every sector. And human military officers trained mixed-species units in tactics that emphasized adaptability over doctrine. Deathworld Omega had produced something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that thrived on challenge, that bonded across biological boundaries, that viewed obstacles as puzzles to solve rather than threats to flee. The other species had evolved to survive in stable environments. Humanity had evolved to survive in chaos. And now that chaos had come to the galaxy in the form of spatial anomalies and extra-dimensional entities, humanity was exactly what everyone needed. Krath retired from Strategic Command after 40 cycles of service. He spent his retirement studying human culture, trying to understand what made them so successful. The answer wasn't complicated. Humans believed in progress, not as a concept, but as a fundamental truth. They looked at any situation and assumed it could be improved. Any problem could be solved. Any challenge could be overcome. It made them insufferable sometimes, pushy, and overconfident and unwilling to accept that some things couldn't be changed. But it also made them incredibly effective. When the galaxy said something was impossible, humanity heard that as a challenge. They'd spent their entire evolutionary history being told they couldn't survive, couldn't thrive, couldn't build civilizations on a world that kept trying to kill them. They'd proved their planet wrong. Now they were proving the galaxy wrong. The second wave of anomalies opened 30 cycles after the first. This time the Council was ready. The Galactic Defense Initiative mobilized immediately. Human commanders led mixed-species fleets using tactics they'd developed during the Verge crisis. The engagements were brutal but manageable. The entities were stopped. The anomalies were closed. Casualties were lighter than the first time. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to fight the unfightable. But more importantly, they'd taught the galaxy how to work together. Species that had been rivals for centuries fought side by side. Ancient grudges were set aside. Cultural differences became tactical advantages as different perspectives contributed unique solutions. Humanity hadn't just defended the galaxy, they'd united it. That was the final piece of the puzzle. Deathworld Omega hadn't just produced survivors or warriors or explorers. It had produced bridge builders, species uniquely qualified to connect disparate groups because they'd spent their entire history doing exactly that. Every human civilization had started as competing tribes and learned to cooperate. They'd practiced federation building on themselves before exporting it to the stars. 70 cycles after first contact, Ambassador Ross retired. She gave one final speech to the Council, reflecting on humanity's journey. She thanked the species who had welcomed Earth despite their fears. She acknowledged the mistakes humanity had made along the way, the cultural misunderstandings, the economic disruptions, the political tensions. She promised that humanity would continue working to be good galactic citizens while staying true to themselves. Then she said something that became famous across 700 species. The galaxy learned Earth's real name and panicked because they thought we were monsters. They were wrong. We're not monsters. We're family, and family protects each other. The applause lasted for 20 minutes. Every species represented, every delegation standing, acknowledging the truth of her words. The galaxy had feared humanity, then needed humanity, then accepted humanity. Now they couldn't imagine the galaxy without humanity. Krath watched the speech from his home on Vaxia Prime. He'd been right about everything and wrong about everything. Right that humanity would change the galaxy. Wrong about it being a disaster. They changed things for the better. Made the galaxy safer, more connected, more dynamic. The ancient empires were adapting or declining. New partnerships were forming across old boundaries. Species were learning from each other in ways that hadn't happened in millennia. All because one death world had produced one impossible species that refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. Krath raised his glass in a private toast to humanity, the monsters from Death World Omega, the explorers who saw mysteries instead of threats, the warriors who fought for others before themselves, the family the galaxy never knew it needed, the species that made panic give way to something better, hope. Captain Lisa Grant, now Admiral Grant, commanded the Earth Defense Fleet from the orbital platform above her homeworld. She looked out at the stars and remembered that first contact 70 cycles ago. The massive ships dropping into the solar system. The terror and excitement of that moment. Humanity had come so far since then. Spread across hundreds of worlds. Formed bonds with hundreds of species. Helped defend the galaxy from threats that came from outside reality itself. And they were just getting started. The galaxy was vast. Full of mysteries to solve, challenges to overcome. Friends to make, humanity had proven they belonged here. Now they'd prove there was no limit to what they could achieve. Not because they were from a death world, but because they were human. And humans didn't give up, ever. The stars waited, and humanity was ready.